From Yale to Texas, Shea Stadium to City, and everywhere in between, this New York Times best-selling author about to release his third book, 108 Stitches, has seen a lot during his life in baseball, both on and off the field. A 1986 World Series champion with our beloved New York Mets, to now over a decade entertaining us in the broadcast booth alongside Gary and Keith, it's Mr. Ron Darling. How's it going, Ron?
It's going great. I was just explaining to you, you said you had a little intro, and I said, I kind of recognize that person that you talk about, but it seems a little foreign to me because it's been such a long life in the game.
Yeah. Well, I love the book. We'll get to that in a little bit, but your life in the game spans decades, and there's so many great stories in the book that we'll get to later that I love the correlation between your relationships with players and your life watching the game as a fan. Now, being an analyst, and you were a professional baseball player, but the connection between everyone that you've came across in your life of baseball, and everyone's kind of connected in some aspect.
You know, what's strange for almost every ball player, maybe not for Sandy Koufax, but for almost every ball player, it ends the same way, poorly. You end up not being very good at your job anymore, and you kind of put out the pasture. And I think everyone that I've ever met, for 4 or 5 years, you just don't want anything to do with baseball. You're out because, I don't know, I think I'm stealing this from a songwriter, but you get kind of betrayed by the calendar. Uh-huh. And that's it, and it's done. And what do you do now? And so you stay away from the game. And then I was fortunate enough to come back to the game now as an announcer, and it's revitalized me because I forgot how much I love this game. I loved it since I was 5 years old. And so it's fun. Listen, I played almost 10 seasons with the Mets. This is my 14th year with SNY. So I'm getting close to 25 years that the Orange and Blue has picked up the tab. So I'm pretty lucky.
So did you think as a player when you were nearing the end of your career that the broadcast path was going to be the next step for you? Did you always have aspirations for this?
You know, it's interesting. I'm on camera with Tim McCarver, who asked me the same question, I don't know, about 88 or 89, and I said, absolutely not. There's no way I'll be on TV. But you know what was funny is that when I did not pitch, they used to have a headset down at the end of the bench at Shea Stadium. And I would always put it on to listen to the broadcasts of Tim and Ralph because I found it just fascinating. And so maybe by osmosis, Tim McCarver and Ralph Kiner got me in this job because I found it fascinating what they were talking about, and it wasn't always what was going on in the game. So I guess I brought a little bit of that to whatever we do.
Speaking of the end of the dugout, I think that's where you were sitting when Michael Sergio, the Shea jumper, came and gave you a fist bump after he parachuted into Shea, right?
I mean, we live in such a different world now, right? So, certainly that would be such a cause for alarm. But it was a little more innocent then, and for a Mets fan like Michael to decide he was going to do this, to tell his family to watch TV, and for him to time it in such a way, I think, given the times, it was one of the greatest things I've ever seen happen. Forget about the flybys or the eagles or all that kind of stuff, falconry. What Michael Sergio did on that night will forever be there's no reason for me to have Michael Sergio in my brain. It'll be there forever.
Right. Well, I was unbelievable. I didn't really get to witness it. I was 5 in '86, so I haven't been able to really have that World Series feeling.
Memory,
besides, 2015. Unfortunately, they didn't get it done. But Sergio, actually, I've had some contact with him since I started the 7 Line, and I think that he actually has some behind-the-scenes footage, so we might actually see something eventually come out. I think he's past, the statute of limitations of getting in trouble again, but I think there is some, behind-the-scenes footage that we might actually see creep out there eventually.
I was just thinking, boy, if he had a GoPro.
Yeah, right?
Days, right?
All right, so you're back home. Spring training, does it always feel as long as it seems? You get a couple days off now before the season kicks off.
I love it. The broadcasts, they're inversely related to a game. When you watch a game, it kind of builds momentum till the end. When it's the denouement, right? But for spring training games, it's just the opposite. Like all the action, especially early, happens in the first 3 innings. All the players leave, and all the players that you don't know come into the game. So as far as doing a game, it's difficult. But I like March in Port St. Lucie because my life is spent at airports, and it's kind of a weird whirlwind. So in Port St. Lucie, people ask me all the time, what did you do yesterday? Nothing.
Yeah, right,
what did you do the day before? Nothing. What are you going to do tomorrow? Absolutely nothing. So I like that calm before kind of the storm of the season.
Yeah. I liked the other day, there was a shot on SNY. It was showing the beach, and I said something on Twitter. Like the beach isn't really necessarily close to here, so if you're watching the broadcast, you might have this idea that spring training and the beach are connected, but they're not really that close. And I think Gary Apple said something to Keith about... Sorry.
Yeah.
Gary Apple said something to Keith. Who wouldn't want to be down here at spring training? And Keith, there was a little bit of delay, and Keith goes, "You're asking me? I can give you a million reasons why I wouldn't want to be here."
I know, and I had said, I think on the broadcast before, I don't know if Wayne Randazzo was doing the game or Gary Apple, and Gary or Wayne had asked me.
I think it was Wayne, actually, yeah.
Yeah, kind of the same kind of question. And said, what do you think of the beach there? Well, I said false advertising.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was.
So those things tend to get us in trouble, so I should really stop doing that.
So a lot of action this offseason. Brodie came in, and the Mets were very active. At the end of the season last year, when we didn't know who the GM was going to be, there was some back pages that said you may have wanted to throw your hat in the ring. Was that a far-fetched idea, or did you actually have aspirations of maybe becoming or trying out?
I think it was a pretty far-fetched idea. How it came about is I was asked, as I was when I'm preparing for the Turner broadcast, in the postseason, I always meet with a half dozen reporters, usually local reporters, that we sit around and just shoot the breeze about what I think about going into the postseason. And the question was, if you were asked to be a general manager, would you ever think about it? And I said, yeah, I would think about it. That's as simple as it was. So it was interesting, and I really have to thank a lot of the people who thought that would be a good idea. One, I don't know if they can pay me enough to work the 24/7 kind of job, but even more importantly, I don't know if I have the talent to do it. Simply, to be able to combine the people skills, which I think I'm not great at, people skills with analytics, with baseball knowledge, with being able to understand today's player. I think that's a real unique, amazing talent. And I think Brodie has it in spades.
Well, you're talking about the pay. I was actually surprised that a guy who's probably doing pretty all right with his commissions as an agent would take what you would assume is a pay cut for this gig. So were you surprised that Brodie landed the job or took it?
Well, maybe I was surprised that he took it. I'm not surprised that he landed it, because he's, you meet him for 5 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. You're like, okay, where can I find a place for this guy? Right. He's just amazing. So I'm not surprised he landed it. As far as taking it, I think it's admirable that a guy that is so good at what he does could play it safe and continue to do what he does, but it challenged himself to really go outside the box and put something else on his resume. And he's I don't know his entire story, but I'm assuming he's probably been great at whatever he's done since he was a kid. Mm-hmm. So it's safe to assume he's going to be good at this too.
So we know that the Mets just gave Jacob deGrom an extension. It actually happened as I was on my way here. I was going to ask you what the biggest move of the offseason was. Do you think that's it?
No, I don't think that's it. I think that the biggest move did not happen in acquisitions or on the field. I think the biggest move is that Brodie came in and he changed the conversation. I think that, in my opinion, the conversation had been increasingly negative, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think that when Brodie came in, he had a unique perspective on what others thought of the New York Mets and the organization and how it could button things up as far as how other people view this, I think, great product, right? And so I think that was the biggest story for me of the off season. As far as Jacob's concerned, I hate to talk about contracts or openly root for players to get contracts, But I will say that in the back of my mind, I always wanted him to get paid because he's done nothing but been great from the second he's been here. He's been nothing but a great teammate. And then what he did last year was remarkable because I don't think there's any other pitcher in the game that would have taken that nonsense for 6 months and did not say a thing. He did not call out a teammate. He just put his nose to the grindstone and kept churning away. That was one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen a ball player do because unlike other sports, it's every single day. And your accountability is on the line every single day. And what a job he did.
Well, I put up a poll asking the fans if they were optimistic that this was going to get done before opening day, and there was thousands of votes, and it was like 75% no. And even a couple days ago, Jacob came out and he said he wasn't too optimistic either that this was going to happen. Do you think that having a guy like Syndergaard talk to the press and say, you know, hopefully, what did he say? Something about, I wish the fuss was over. Does that...
Pay him already.
Yeah. Does that help? I mean, as a team, they probably don't want one of their star players to come out and back up their guy, but someone had to take the bullet, I guess. I was listening on Sports Talk Radio on the way here, and they were saying, if there's a leader on the team now, do you think it would be a Syndergaard? Like, who's the man?
Well, I mean, one, Noah has a vested interest in Jacob getting paid. I don't think the people that talk the loudest are always the ones that lead. I think what Noah said, two things. One about paying Jacob. Everyone felt that way in the clubhouse. Mm-hmm. So I think he really said something that kind of have to take notice if you're management and say, hey, you know what, this guy is so dear to us that we would like at least, you know, we'd like him to get his due. And then what he said about the Syracuse trip, every ball player has always had negative feelings about whether it's going to Jackson, Mississippi, mm-hmm. or Tidewater or Norfolk or whatever. But it's something that always has to be done, and it's a way to promote the game. It's a way to promote your organization.
It makes
it's a way
sense.
to promote your brand. But that being said, every ball player throughout the history of the game has always felt exactly how Noah said. But I think the most important thing that got this done, and apparently it was done in Sarasota, mm-hmm. is when Jacob talked. Mm-hmm. And when he said he did not think it was going to get done, I think those were the words that management heard. And because of some of the things, ancillary things that are happening, I think they took notice and tried to get it done. And like I said, I applaud both sides. This was a unique position because you can understand management's side, right?
Yeah.
30 years old, free agent at 32, control for 2 more years. You can go on and on about the business of it. But the tough part is that Jacob's advocate is now his boss. Mm-hmm. So only months ago at the All-Star game, Jacob and Brodie at some point had to have a conversation on his worth.
Right.
And so Jacob knew what his worth was. Jacob knew that Brodie knew what his worth was. So I think that made it more and more difficult for management to just stick to the business side of it when it was pretty obvious that everyone knew, both sides knew where it was going to end up.
Well, I read in the book, I'm pretty sure it was your last day of camp in 82 or 83, and Don Zimmer had called you into the office, and he said, you're not making the team, but next month, if we need a fifth starter, you're the guy. And by the time it took you to drive from there to your hotel room, you were traded to the New York Mets. So that feeling that you had of you were ecstatic that you may have been getting the call soon, for a guy like Pete Alonso, who a lot of us probably didn't think the Mets were going to add him to the opening day lineup. It looks like they haven't really come out and said it yet, but it looks like that's going to happen. Are you surprised by that?
Well, one, if it does happen, kudos to the Mets. I think that I hear it all the time. I've heard it since I was a ball player that we are going to go north with the 25 best players.
Right.
Very rarely does that happen.
Right.
For a couple of reasons. One, because of contract type of issues. But secondly, sometimes the players you need against Washington might be different than the players you need for Miami in the next series. So interchangeability of rosters from AAA, AA to the majors is probably more prevalent than it's ever been. So things are going to change. no matter who goes north. That being said, it was a pleasure to watch Alonso. I didn't know he was as an accomplished hitter. And what I mean, will he struggle? Of course he's going to have that time. Every young player does. But I thought him more of a slugger, not really a guy who has a real idea at the plate. And there's nothing further from the truth. He looks more like a finished Rhys Hoskins kind of player than he does just a big behemoth that comes out and hits the ball over the fence. So he proved a lot, I think, of not only his worth, but his worth at the club.
Well, the NL East looks like it's going to be stacked if you can just eliminate the Marlins there. But the first 19 of 24 games are against the NL East. And I think having, like you said, bringing the best team north makes the most sense. But where do you see this team matching up against the East when it comes down to it?
Well, I think they're really going to be locking horns all summer. I would not be surprised at some point if 86 and 76 kind of wins this division, 10 games over. It'll probably go down again to who beats up on the Marlins. Last year, I think the Braves were 14-5 against the Marlins last year, so that played a big part in them winning the NL East. You can make an argument, except for the Marlins, for all four teams, really, to win the division. They all have their strengths. They all have their weaknesses. If you look at the Phillies, they signed the biggest name in Bryce Harper. They're starting pitching, their bullpen. We'll see. You look at the Braves. I hate to argue against a team that won last year. They kind of like boxing. They have the belt, right? But will Donaldson stay healthy? They have a lot of young pitching, a lot of talent, but again, young players. Sophomore slumps for kind of Albies and Acuna Jr. Where do they go? And for DC, life after Harper. No one really knows what that's going to be like. People talk about, this guy can replace him. This guy, you don't replace Bryce Harper, in a lineup. He just is a guy that when I used to pitch, you identify him. He can't beat you. So you're thinking about him as the lineup turns over and over. That'll not be the case. And for the Mets, maybe the Achilles heel, as you look at them, exponentially they've increased their roster. Exponentially they've gotten better in their 25-man people on the field, and their depth. When a major league player goes down, they have a major league player to replace him. That hasn't always been the case, as you know, as well as anyone. But they are a little older because they're in a win-now kind of mode. So if you see Ramos and Lowry and Cano in the lineup 125, 130 times a year, you're going to have a good summer.
I hope so. I mean, I feel like this offseason went kind of quick. I don't know if the lack of snow up here on the East Coast, but last year we had a snow out. So hopefully I'm not jinxing it here. But let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the book. It's called 108 Stitches. And this is your third collaboration with your friend and co-author. Is it Paisner? Dan
Paisner.
Dan Paisner. So it's called 108 Stitches, Loose Threads, Ripping Yarns, and the Darnest Characters from My Time in the Game. Tell us a little bit about the title. What's behind 108 Stitches?
Well, one, I didn't know if it was going to play that long, the title. But 108 Stitches, for people out there that love the spear, there's 108 stitches in a baseball. So when I'm on the road, I spend a lot of time alone. Part of the things I love to do when I'm alone is just write down things that either I'll use in the broadcast or now in books, now the third book. But I wanted to see if I could, with the stories I know, tie each story to the next. So it would be like 108 stitches of a ball that it completes the kind of circle or pattern. And I think I was able to do it. It's about 10, 12 years ago, I had some friends that own a saloon down in Tribeca. I used to love to go have lunch there and would see friends, once a week or whatever. And they would always kid that I needed to write a saloon book, a book that they could put behind the gin or behind the vodka and scotch, that if you're there alone, you could just open it up to any page and you'd get a story.
Yeah.
So this is my saloon book, 108 Stitches. It's an easy read. It's fun. And it was a chance for me to get, not only to get all the stories that I've kind of been through out, because I wanted them on the written page, but also to pay homage to a lot of the people that I played with that kind of made me who I am.
Well, I love it. I'm more than halfway through. And like you said, you can pretty much open it anywhere. A lot of the stories, some of them do reference back to stories prior. Like you write, I wrote about this and this is how they're linked. But like you said, you can basically open it anywhere and just start from there. But I do want to bring up a story because we hear stories about, David Wright throwing out Syndergaard's lunch or John Roush throwing water on Matt Harvey, whether that happened or not. But your first day at Shea Stadium, September 1st, 1983, there's a story in the book that struck me in a way where I felt bad for you. I felt, as I'm reading that, I'm thinking, man, that's horrible. So can you touch on that? What happened on your first day at Shea Stadium?
Well, I was a strapping 6'4", 195. You don't think a guy like that could get bullied. But no, I was a September call-up in 83. Mets fans know that. And one of the great honors of being a ball player is to put on the uniform. You think about it. You dream about it. You can't wait for that time. So when I got to the ballpark, I'd been called up. I wasn't going to pitch till the 6th of September against the Phillies. And I got dressed early. I got on the bench. I was sitting there in the pristine, well, not so pristine. The uniforms now are so much better than the uniforms we had in the day. But pristine Mets uniform, and I sat on the bench, and one of the older players, as was the way in those days, saw how eager I was, and with a little spittoon of chaw, kind of sullied the uniform. And I was honestly devastated. But at the same point, now people are listening to this and saying, how can that happen? Well, it certainly wouldn't happen today.
Right.
And that was a rite of passage that everyone went through in those days, and you had to either speak out against it and be ostracized from the entire clubhouse, or kind of take it and prove that, hey, I can take it and I don't care. I chose the latter, as almost every player does, and took my coat, which in those days was kind of like a shiny material. I don't even know how to say
like satin.
The satin windbreaker type material, and kind of put it over my lap because it had stained over my quad to not show the stain, and kind of ruined my moment. But
that's such a bummer,
it's just how things were kind of done in those days. And I'm so happy that it doesn't happen anymore. It's the silliest thing.
Well, yeah, you don't think your first day getting called up, you're trying to soak in the atmosphere, and you were kind of doing everything the right way, staying out of people's way, and then you get spit on.
Well, I certainly soaked it in a different way.
Yeah, I just felt your pain there when I was reading the book. So the 86 team was known for a lot of rowdy behavior and on-field brawls. Something that also struck me in the book, Game 4 of the World Series in Boston, your wife at the time was mugged outside the stadium?
Yeah, my first wife.
That's crazy.
Tony O'Reilly, who was an Irish model. We were going to buy my parents a television. Now, this is how long ago it was, folks. In those days, cash was king. Yeah. So she had a lot of cash on her. The next day, we were going to go get a television for my parents. And it was just taken out of her purse. She wasn't mugged. She was just, they just lifted her wallet or whatever. But the best part of that story is that Kevin Mitchell, who is the sweetest person, if you ever met him, sweetest person in the entire world, unless he doesn't like you.
Right.
You do not want to be on his bad side. And he literally went into the local park, which is about, 100 yards away from Fenway Park, looking for the assailants or the people that had lifted my ex-wife's wallet. And for that, I'm forever grateful.
Did he get it back?
He never got it back.
Okay.
Or at least he told me he never got it back. But that was a nice gesture by Kevin. No one was hurt in it. But I didn't find out, because I pitched Game 4, until I got back to the room. And it tells you a lot about how, as a ball player, you think that what you're doing is the most important thing. How's the world not stopping?
Right.
It's Game 4 of the World Series. And I remember getting back to the room, because there were two buses, one bus for the players, which was an hour and a half after the game, one bus for wives and family that would leave 15 minutes after the game. And I got back to the hotel room in Boston, Sheraton in Boston. I still stay there. And I walked into the room, and she was crying, and I said, what happened? And she told me the story. And I thought that I was going to come in and really celebrate, shutting out the Red Sox in Fenway Park, where I grew up, and it's not that way. So it was honestly, it was interesting, because after I knew that she was not hurt, and everything was all right, it was like, it should be this way. It's only 2-2. There's a lot more to go. So, right. One thing I remember about that game, other than that, was as soon as the game was done, I went 7 innings. I think Roger and Jesse cleaned up, which was the norm in those days. And after the game was done, I was interviewed, by the 100 reporters, whatever. But my on-the-field TV interviews, which I have to do all the time now from the booth, was done by Marv Albert and Peter Gammons. So, just think of those two titans as sideline reporters in the day.
Wow. So let's talk about that. You grew up in the area, and you were a Red Sox fan growing up. So what's that like when now it's a job, you're playing for the team against the team that you grew up cheering for. So what's that like? I mean, clearly you want to win, you're on the Mets, this is your livelihood and that's your team. But what's it like to then play the sport that you grew up loving, but you're going against your childhood team?
Yeah, I think it really ends once you become a professional, because it's all about the team you're with. So originally drafted by Texas, traded to the Mets. So all I thought about was Texas and the Mets. So I really, after 1981, never even thought about the Red Sox. So that was 5 years in the making. But my friends didn't forget. So I was leaving 40, 50 tickets a game. And I think other than my mother, and I mean this, I think my brothers and my father still wanted the Red Sox to win. They wanted me to pitch well.
Yeah.
And I always thought after game 1, I lost 1-0, that it was almost the best of both worlds for everyone I knew from Massachusetts, because I pitched well, but the Red Sox won the game.
Right.
So it was strange. It was, throwing in the bullpen. I didn't feel right. I'd never been to Fenway Park or played there, other than, going to the park once when I was a kid, because we just didn't have the money to go to ball games. And it was very strange. It was the only time before a game that I wasn't sure that I could handle all that was going on. Only time ever. There's a lot of times I did not perform well in games, but not because I ever felt any kind of pressure or whatever. That was the first time that I had really felt the kind of pressure on the field.
It's got to be tough too for a family, like let's say the Darnos that have 2 sons that are in the league. Like who do you root for when they're going up against each other? But I love in the book where I don't think that on the show, let's say we're streaming on the internet, if I drop an F-bomb or a curse or whatever, it doesn't add to the show. But I like that in the book.
I would sure like to do that on the broadcast. Yeah.
I like in the book, it's written in a way where you are just sitting there talking with your buddy, and it's written in a way where I'm just kind of hearing you tell the story rather than it being something that I would hear on the broadcast. But what's it like to be so open and honest with the stories like we brought up about the uniform, where you're putting names to some of the stories where guys might get upset? There's something to hear about Elster's exploits, and in today's climate it might not have been as not accepted, but he may have gotten in a little trouble for being as braggadocious as he was. So what's it like putting names to these stories and putting it out there for the world to see?
I'm going to be 58 this year. I find it liberating just to speak on some of the things that just seem so silly now and don't make any sense. As far as repercussions from telling some stories that I find interesting. We live in a very sensitive time, and I think you can see that whether you're a social media person or just I can see that with my own children, how more sensitive they are than I was allowed to be as a kid. So listen, if you read this entire book, you're going to love it and have fun with it. Is it going to pass every single smell test from every single person in the world. Certainly not. But that's part of writing stuff down. That I'm a voracious reader. Maybe that's why I love to write things down. And to me, it's liberating. The game I did about Game 7, where I came up short, that was cathartic. Liberating to talk about inability to come up big in a big moment. And these are just they're little dirges, right? Is that from the song? They're just little ditties about my time in the game, and if I did offend anyone, that's kind of how it goes. I didn't mean to.
So let's switch it up a little bit, because I know that you're back on Twitter, and you wrote a tweet recently, and you said something. To be completely honest, I'm back on here because with the book coming out, and then you're active, and that's just the way it goes.
They asked me to
when you're promoting. Yeah, I mean, you got to do what you got to do. That's the day that that's the era. So I did ask Twitter if they wanted to ask you some questions, and I know that you saw a couple of them. Yeah. So the first one here is from @Miss_Met. What was your experience like acting in Shallow Hal?
Well, it was fantastic. And the story goes is that the Farrelly brothers, and a lot of people now are knowing Peter Farrelly because of the Green Book and the Oscar or whatever, but Peter and Bobby Farrelly, that have done so many hilarious kind of movies, had come to me. And how they had come to me is that they were in Hawaii at some point. They had this idea of the Shallow Hal movie, the two sides to people. And they had found selling coconuts and pineapples by the side of the road this Hawaiian kid. And the way their mind works is that this kid has got to be in our next movie. So they brought him in from Hawaii. He was in the movie, and they needed a kind of a counterpoint if you've seen the movie Shallow Hal. Yeah. So they needed a counterpoint, and they told me the discussion they had was, "Hey, Bobby, do you know anybody Hawaiian?" Bobby said to Peter, "I don't know anybody Hawaiian. Do you know anyone Hawaiian?" And finally they came up with my name. So I was called in from California, flew all night to Charlotte, North Carolina, stayed in my trailer like a big-time actor until 11:30 that night. So I was there from 6:30 in the morning to 11:30 that night, shot my scene, and one of the things I'll always remember, and my scene is forgettable. I couldn't even come up with a Hawaiian accent, so they had to have the young kid dub my voice. So tells you what kind of actor. Keith's the actor in our trio. But one of the things I'll always remember is probably why the Farrelly brothers have so many people that continue to do movies with them, is that when I was done my scene, because it was my first time ever being on screen, which it's not totally true, but it was really my first kind of scene in a movie. The entire craft services, camera people, makeup artists, they all came on set and gave me a standing O. And they do that for anyone's first time on
That's great.
On camera. And that to me was the greatest part of the whole night.
Well, you're in a couple other movies after that as well, I think. Mr. 3000.
Yeah, I don't know if they were before or after. Again, all of them forgettable. But
your IMDb.
Yeah, but I do get the royalty checks that are amazing to go to the bank with. I think the last one I put in was, and I put them into my son's account, who's 3 years old. I think the last one was a whopping $2.31. I don't even know what to do with them because they're laughable, but certainly not laughable to everyone. So that's why I throw them in there.
That's great. So at Tyrone Hagens, which was more impactful, when you knew you made it as a major leaguer and when you knew it was over?
Boy, I think when it's over is more impactful because you don't know what the future's going to bring when you have that first start. I came up with much, aplomb or acclaim that I was supposed to be one of their next line of certainly not in the talent of Syndergaard and DeGrom and other, but I was considered like that, this next pitcher that was going to help this pitching-rich organization. But when you're released, as I was, and released on my birthday, it's a strange thing, and for your fans, really quickly. So I was called into Tony La Russa's office. Tony was my manager, and he used to call me. His nickname for me was Load, And the reason he called me the load is because some players are just a load. They're just a pain in the ass, to be around. They need this, need that. But he called it in a funny way because I was the opposite of. He never even heard me. I was never in the training room, none of that stuff. So he used to kiddingly call me the load, like you would call a skinny person chub.
Right.
And so he called me in the office. He said, listen, we need this. I'll always remember the name. There's two names I always remember. Julio Vasquez, who took over my starting role with the Mets, rightfully so. And then Doug Johns was a pitcher who took over my spot with the A's. And so Tony called me in and said, hey, listen, load, we have Doug Johns. We need to see what he can do. But we want you to, to stay. I want you to be around Eck. Eck and I were very good friends. And so maybe, you can go on the DL, whatever. I was hurting a little bit. And I said, well, first, Tony, it's my birthday today, so you should say happy birthday first.
Yeah.
And he said, do not tell me it's your birthday. I said, it is my 35th birthday. And he felt really bad. And then I said, second, I've never been on the disabled list. So even though I broke my thumb in 87, there was no disabled list in September. So I'd never really been on the disabled list. So I said, I'm not going on the disabled list. And I said, Eck can take care of himself.
Yeah.
So I remember, and again, this is kind of like the stories you hear and hear, not politically correct, but I remember stopping at a 7-Eleven and getting a tall boy Bud Light. And I drank it while I was in the car. I drove home, and I was so liberated because I was terrible. When you're terrible, for athletes, you always think your next start, your next at-bat is going to turn you around. That's just how our brains work. But it wasn't. I was done. And so as I drove home and I was sipping on this Bud Light, I got to my house, and I thought it was going to be unbelievable. My two little boys were going to be there. My ex-wife was going to be there. And I was going to say, Daddy's home, and let's just hang out, and this is going to be great. No more baseball, no more traveling, whatever.
Yep.
And I got home, and both boys were going on play dates and sleep dates. My ex-wife was going on a tennis weekend in Pebble Beach, and so I was in the house alone. So it let me know that even though I thought my life was important, it wasn't. The world was still moving, and I thought it would stop because I had this momentous, impactful thing happen to me. It was impactful to only me.
Yeah. Wow. So at Doug9494, did you ever get over that loss to St. John's after no hitting them for 11 innings? You also struck out 16, which is incredible.
Yeah, you know what it is? It's kind of funny is that I don't know what this says about me and my career, but losing that game, I think I'm more famous than if I would ever won the game. That pitching 11 innings, no-hit ball, losing it in the 12th to a local team, St. John's, that I end up, there's so many St. John's fans that are Mets fans, right? Yeah. I think I became more famous because of that. So I never even thought about it twice. I know towards the end of my college career, and that's the last game I pitched, it was a whirlwind because every time I pitched, there was 40 to 50 scouts, and it was becoming overbearing. Like I just couldn't take it anymore because every start was, this has got to be great. You got to be great today. You got to be great, and it's hard to be that all the time. So I ended my college career with the greatest game I ever pitched, whether it was as a little leaguer, although I didn't pitch, as a collegiate, or even as a pro. It was the best game I ever pitched, and I'm known for losing it. So
that was against Viola?
Against Viola. I always tell Frank, because we became friends after that I got him a second-round pick. He was going to go in the fourth or fifth round. I got him to the second round. But it was a fantastic game, and one thing that I'll never forget, and it really says a lot about St. John's family, the school, and their athletes, is that after I gave up the hit to Steve Scaffa, who I believe was, I want to say their second baseman. I'm probably going to get this wrong. But he was their pesky leadoff hitter. The entire St. John's team came out of the dugout and gave me a standing O. I don't think that's ever happened in college for an opposing player, but it shows a lot about their class.
So you mentioned being great on the mound or trying to be great on the mound. And I put something. I retweeted something recently. It was a GIF of Dwight Gooden, and you replied something that you were happy you were able to witness that every day and watch him. I think you were charting his pitches, maybe.
I was, yeah.
So you wrote in the book too, where it's tough to watch Doc and then go out the next day. You're not Doc. You're you. So how hard is it as a starting pitcher to follow a guy like a Doc or follow a guy like DeGrom and try to maybe change your own repertoire to try to match what they're doing rather than just doing your own thing?
Yeah, I think, it's pitching envy. That's really what it is. And I think it was my immaturity as a pitcher. Even though Dwight was 19 and I was 22, 23, his maturity as a pitcher was so better than mine. And so I didn't really know what kind of pitcher I was. I had come to pitching late. I always wanted to be the next Cal Ripken. Lack of talent stopped that from happening. And so when I became a pitcher, I really didn't know anything about mechanics, fundamentals, how to get people out. I had never thought about that. I hated pitchers. I hated pitching. So to watch a 19-year-old kid do it the way you're supposed to do it, I know I caught myself many times saying, okay, the way to stardom is I need to strike out 10 guys plus like he does it. And I probably did that maybe a handful of games in my career until I matured and then realized that, I'm not him. I'm never going to be him, but I could be a really good me. Like I need do the best me. And once that happened, then everything took off. And I never forget either that I was very fortunate. I played in a time, which is very rare in Mets history, when the team was outstanding season after season after season. I never forget that was a big part of my success too.
So you guys have it seems like such a great relationship in the booth, the three of you guys, now over a decade. I think you said, what is it, 16 years?
That's funny that you said it seems like. That's funny that you said.
Well, because, you never know. I mean, you're on camera, you're talking to the guys for hours and hours a day, and you mentioned something in the book about how when you're done with work, like, in the ninth inning, Keith might already be packing up his briefcase. He wants to get the hell out of there. But, watching the way you guys gel with each other, and I feel like every year gets a little bit better. I watch a lot of baseball. I listen to broadcasts, and I think that the Mets radio booth and the baseball booth is some of the best or the best in baseball. And luckily we get to hear you. Luckily and unluckily, when the Mets are out and we get to watch you in TBS, I think that fans really love hearing a familiar voice. But the relationship that you guys have with each other, I feel like is something very special.
It's probably the most special relationship, other than with my three younger brothers, that I ever had in my life. And I'm talking about relationship with two other dudes, right? And when you look at it in a strange way, Keith and I have known each other for such a long time, but if you look at me and Gary and you take out the sports, Gary and I are a lot alike, and the kind of the ways we what has happened in our life. So Keith and I were close when we were players, but the grind of being a player doesn't really allow you to have I shouldn't say that. Some guys are good at having really close friendships and playing. I was never like that. I think I had a real aloofness as a player, and that was just, I could only do my job if I was totally invested in my job. I'm not invested in you or anyone else. I need to be invested in me. It's the only way I can make it work. So there was an aloofness that I had as a player. So Keith and I never really got close because Keith didn't have that aloofness. And but I think the reason we're close is, as a broadcast team, is that we had to lean on each other. I didn't have any experience, 1 year in Washington. Keith had the most experience at TV, but had never done that number of games. And Gary's coming from radio, and radio and TV are really two different kind of entities. And also Gary was so good at radio that it might have worked against him. You know what I mean? Like if he had been just a regular radio guy, it might have been an easier transition, but he's one of the best of all time behind the mic. So there was a transition for him. So I think what happened is that in the beginning we really needed to lean on each other. I also credit the 2006 team because they were so good and gave us so many great moments that it allowed us to gel as a broadcast. And then I think, if it doesn't sound too strange, I mean, I think we really do have an affirmation and love for each other because of, when it gets kind of naked up there and you start to go down a road and you're not sure where it's going to end up, they kind of direct you. And if Gary's telling the story, we kind of are there for him in case he falls backwards or whatever. And I just think it's one of the most unique relationships I've ever had. I think when we're at our best, there's three kinds of broadcasts, right? It's a straightforward one. Johan Santana's no-hitter. That's where we got to be on point, make sure we capture everything that you have to capture in a moment like that. I think there's one when it's a different kind of game or whatever, and maybe there's not a lot of action happening, so we break out into this kind of free-form jazz where whoever is playing the instrument the best that night, we let him roll. We have that, and then on those certain seasons and certain games where all is lost, I think we're like the Larry Sanders Show. Like we're a
so broadcast. You break out the baseball cards.
Yeah, like we're a broadcast that's making fun of a real broadcast.
Yeah.
We probably shouldn't do that, but I don't know, it seems to work for us.
Do you and Keith ever bust Gary's chops that he's the only one in the booth that hasn't been on the cover of GQ?
Oh, we've never done that, because I think it's funny for Keith, and who knows, Gary's the best dressed of us three now. When we first started, Gary, and I think it was just because he came from radio and he just didn't want to buy into that TV thing of having a nice suit and a nice tie on. He's by far the best dressed. He comes into the booth now, we're like, whoa, where did you get that suit and tie? And Keith and I are like sloppily put it together right before the camera goes on. So he might end up on GQ at some point. But I think this must happen with actors and actresses later in their career. I'm asked every single day to sign pictures of me when I was 25 years old. When you're 58 years old and being compared to your 25-year-old self, it kind of hurts your feelings, So when you see your GQ covers, or I don't know if Keith feels this way, you're really proud. You're honored to be able to sign it. But that person looks like my 31-year-old son. It doesn't look like me.
Someone in the comments actually asked if you still have the suit. Probably not, right?
Oh, there's a great story about that suit. So when I got there were two suits. And the Mets had a representative who came with me. I won't name him. But came with me and was really trying to make sure everything was taken care of. And the photographer... I can't remember his name now. I feel awful because he's one of the most amazing photographers of all time. Richard Avedon. Richard Avedon was a photographer. He's one of the greatest photographers of all time. So we got in the room, and as this Mets representative was kind of trying to direct Avedon to what to do with me, I think he got a little angry. And there were two suits, and I think he was going to do like the Wall Street pinstripe suit, which really looked good, and I think it would look great on me, or this English tweed, which English tweed has nothing to do with my Hawaiian Chinese self. So he chose the English tweed, and I always think that I look frumpy and bad in that picture. But no, I do not have the suit.
I thought it looked pretty sharp. So I want to take another one from the book. I don't want to give too much away because I think the book's fantastic, but something that was in the same chapter about the booth. It's a story from you and Keith after a game in Philadelphia in an elevator. Can you maybe end it with that one, because that's a funny one? I was cracking up on the couch reading this thing.
Yeah, it's when you read it, you'll understand what it is. We kiddingly say, I'm Keith Hernandez and you're not. When you read the story, you'll understand that is absolutely 100% true. So the story, it started, I don't know if I started, can't remember now if I started this way, but Keith and I, we talked about before, we very rarely have a glass of wine after a game, whatever, or Gary. We do it maybe 3-4 times a year because of, we've been in the booth for 4 hours together or more. But this one time, Keith and I said, "You want to have a glass of wine?" Yeah. So we go in, and this young boy comes in and wants an autograph, and this is how it started. So Keith, who is young man, what are you doing in a bar? Where are your parents? Bring your parents in. I want to talk to them. So that's how it started. We had a glass of wine or two, and then we got in the elevator. Ding, the door opens, and there's these two guys that I think are about my age now, maybe a little younger, 50 years old-ish. And one of them has a Reyes jersey, one of them has a Wright jersey. So it's 06, 07, 08, whatever. And Keith gets on, and he looks at them, and he says, "What is wrong with you two? Like, how old are you two? And you're wearing a jersey." I mean, that is the strangest thing I've ever seen. I'm saving the language.
Yeah.
So he does that. The guys are in the back of the elevator. Keith and I are in the front. And ding, the door opens, and it's Keith's floor, but not my floor. Keith gets out, and I'm still standing with these two guys. I have not said a word, and I am appalled that it even happened, this incident. And one guy turns to the other, and I could hear him, and he goes, "That was awesome." So I guess what I take from that story is that Keith is the only person. He's such an original talent. He's such an original person, such an original man. But he is the only person I've ever met in my life that Mets fans can, if he signs an autograph and is sweet and kind to them, they love it. And if he's not as sweet and kind, they might love it more.
That's unbelievable. So 108 Stitches by Ron Darling. Get it anywhere books are sold, April 2nd.
Yes.
Order that online, basically anywhere. Ron, I'm really looking forward to this season. Hopefully the Mets can get it done, and I thank you for your time.
Darren, thank you for making the trek up here. I really appreciate it. You guys do great stuff. You know what you're doing, and I know you serve. There's a real democracy to what you do, and all of the Mets fans that come en masse, whether it's at home or on the road. And I know certainly you've heard from players that I know they really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Ron. Thank you.
Cool.